Welcome to our deep dive into Great Expectations. It's a classic and for good reason. Today we're going beyond just the plot. We're unlocking the literary secrets that make Great Expectations tick, especially for literature students like you.
That's right. We're going to be looking at how Dickens crafted this masterpiece.
Yes. We'll uncover things like how Dickens uses recurring quirks, to reveal his character's true nature. And how Pip's journey explores what it really means to be a gentleman, and how themes of wealth and class, those themes are still relevant today.
Absolutely.
So buckle up. This is going to be a fascinating ride.
It is. Great Expectations offers a rich landscape for literary analysis.
It does. Okay, so to set the stage, we have Pip, an orphan.
Yeah.
He's in the marshes of Kent, and he unexpectedly finds himself on the path to becoming a gentleman, all thanks to a mysterious benefactor.
And that's where Dickens's brilliance shines through. He structures Pip's expectations in 3 distinct stages, mirroring Pip's development. It's almost like a coming-of-age story, but in 3 acts. Each stage peels back a new layer, not just of Pip, but of the world he's navigating.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And something I found interesting is that Dickens doesn't give us specific place names or dates. It feels intentionally vague.
And that's not an accident. You're right. That lack of specificity makes the story, timeless, universal. It becomes a story about human experiences, ambition, love, loss, and the struggle for social mobility. These are all themes that resonate across time.
It's like he's saying that these struggles aren't tied to one specific place or time. They're part of the human experience.
Exactly, no matter who you are.
That's really interesting.
Now let's move on to some of the most memorable characters. We have Pip, of course, Joe, the kind-hearted blacksmith, Miss Havisham, forever trapped in her wedding dress, and the beautiful but cold Estella. Each of them feels so complex and contradictory.
They do. What makes them so compelling is that Dickens goes beyond simply describing them. He gives them these recurring actions, gestures, and even specific ways of speaking, almost like musical themes that reveal their inner nature.
You're talking about what we call character leitmotifs. These are specific patterns or quirks that Dickens uses to add layers to his characters.
Okay, I need an example. What do you mean by character leitmotifs?
Well, take Jaggers the lawyer, for instance. He's constantly washing his hands, almost obsessively. And it's not just a habit. It reflects how he's trying to cleanse himself from the morally gray areas of his profession. It's like he's trying to wash away the guilt of dealing with the darker side of the legal system.
That's a great example. So we should look for these subtle clues, these repeating actions, to understand the characters more deeply.
Precisely.
It's like Dickens is giving us a secret code to unlock their motivations.
Exactly. And these character traits often connect to the larger themes. Dickens is exploring, the themes of wealth and ambition that are so central to the story, especially given the title, Great Expectations.
You're right. The title itself kind of hints at the book's exploration of money, social climbing.
Yeah.
But Dickens doesn't stop there, does he? He really delves into how wealth impacts people's lives, the illusions it creates, the allure and danger of it all.
He certainly does. And one way he does that is by contrasting old money with new money. He uses characters to kind of critique the rigid class system of Victorian England. Think about Miss Havisham representing the decaying aristocracy. Her wealth is inherited.
Right.
Then there's Magwitch, Pip's benefactor, whose wealth comes from hard work, even though it's gained illegally.
It makes you think about how society values people differently based on how they acquire their wealth. This is a question that still resonates today, isn't it? Does the source of your success really matter?
Absolutely. And this ties into another interesting theme. London as a prison. Pip goes there seeking a better life, but he finds himself trapped by social pressures and the anxieties of wealth.
It's like the city itself becomes a symbol of the darker side of ambition, of how the pursuit of wealth can consume you and make you question your values.
That's a very insightful observation. And some literary critics even suggest that London in this context could be a metaphor for the British Empire itself, which, relied on exploiting others to maintain its power and growth.
Wow, that adds a whole new layer of meaning to Pip's journey. It's not just about him trying to become a gentleman, but it reflects a larger social and historical context.
Exactly. And it brings us back to Pip's journey, which is anything but a simple rags to riches story. He achieves that gentleman status he craved, but at what cost?
Yeah, it's true. His transformation isn't straightforward. He gains social standing, but there are consequences. What's interesting is how Dickens explores the idea of moral regeneration through Pip's experiences.
Yes. Pip goes through some difficult trials and suffers quite a bit. Through these challenges, He learns the true value of things like loyalty, kindness, and genuine hard work, things he kind of took for granted in his younger years.
Like his initial reaction to Magwitch. Right.
Yeah.
He's disgusted by the convict at first, but eventually learns to accept and even care for him. It's a powerful shift in his values, almost a shedding of superficiality to recognize real human worth.
You've hit the nail on the head. It makes you think about the possibility of redemption, even for those deemed unworthy by society. How do our own prejudices prevent us from seeing the humanity in others?
This is getting me thinking about all sorts of things. And before we move on, did you notice how Dickens plays with Pip's names? His full name, Philip Parrop, is rarely used. He's mostly just Pip, or even Handel, the nickname Herbert gives him.
That's another example of Dickens' brilliance. He uses names, or the lack thereof, to symbolize Pip's, shifting identity. How others perceive him and how he sees himself are constantly in flux.
It makes you wonder if we've ever felt like our own name didn't quite fit who we are, or how we want to be seen by the world.
That's a powerful question to consider, and it speaks to the larger theme of identity that Dickens explores throughout the novel. It does, it really does. And Dickens masterfully uses a variety of literary tools to bring these themes to life.
You're right. His writing goes beyond, just telling a story. What are some of the techniques that really stand out to you?
Well, one of the most striking aspects is his use of imagery. He doesn't just tell you what's happening. He, paints these vivid pictures with his words, creating an atmosphere you can practically feel.
Yeah, I'm a visual learner, so I definitely connect with that.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific example? What do you mean?
We'll consider the opening scene, in the graveyard. It's more than just a backdrop. It sets the tone for the entire novel, like the bleakness of the marshes, the fog, the feeling of isolation and danger. It all creates this powerful atmosphere. And that imagery of imprisonment and confinement resurfaces throughout the story, hinting at Pip's future struggles with London society.
It's like those early chapters are like subtly planting seeds in our minds. Right? We might not consciously pick up on it at first, but those images and symbols, they resonate as the story progresses.
Precisely. And Dickens was a master of symbolism. Think about how those greasy banknotes from Magwitch repulse Pip. It's not just about the money itself, but it's about where that wealth came from, the social stigma attached to it. It becomes a symbol of Pip's conflict, his desire for a better life battling with his shame and guilt.
I never thought about it that way before, but it makes sense. Dickens takes something ordinary, like money, and turns it into something much more meaningful. Yeah. And he does the same thing with characters, right? Like Miss Havisham's wedding dress. It's not just a quirky detail. It represents her entire life, frozen in time, consumed by bitterness and heartbreak.
Exactly. And remember how that dress eventually catches fire, leading to Miss Havisham's downfall? It's a powerful image. Her past literally consuming her, a consequence of her own twisted schemes.
It's amazing how even the objects and settings in Great Expectations tell their own stories, adding layers of meaning and foreshadowing. Dickens keeps us on our toes, making us think we're seeing one thing while something else entirely is unfolding.
And that's what keeps us engaged, isn't it? The constant element of surprise, the way he challenges our expectations. Just when you think you know where the story is going, Dickens throws in a twist that makes you question everything.
The biggest twist has to be the revelation of Magwitch as Pip's benefactor. Talk about a plot twist. It completely changes how we see Pip's Great Expectations. Suddenly, it's not about inherited wealth and social climbing. It's about the complex relationship between these two characters and the moral implications of their connection.
And that revelation forces us to confront our own prejudices, just like Pip does.
Yeah.
How often do we judge people based on appearances? How do our own expectations color how we see others?
You're right. It makes you really examine those assumptions. There's so much depth to uncover, layer after layer. But I wanted to touch on something we haven't discussed yet. Dickens wrote Great Expectations in serialized form, right?
That's right.
Publishing chapters week by week in a magazine.
That's right. And that structure had a direct influence on his writing style. He had to keep his readers engaged, create suspense, and leave them wanting more at the end of each installment.
So there's a certain dramatic flair to his writing, a sense of urgency and momentum that keeps you hooked.
Absolutely. He was a master of cliffhangers. You can practically hear those Victorian readers clamoring for the next chapter.
It's like he invented, binge reading, but with words.
Right.
But beyond the plot twists and drama, Dickens also created these incredibly memorable characters. How did he achieve that?
Through a combination of vivid descriptions, unique voices, and as we mentioned earlier, those recurring character leitmotifs.
Those little details that make a character unforgettable,
Right.
like Jaggers biting his fingernails or Miss Havisham's skeletal hand always reaching out.
Exactly. Those details might seem insignificant on the surface, but they add such depth and complexity. They hint at the inner turmoil and motivations of each character.
And often those details connect to the larger themes, too. It's like Jaggers washing his hands is also a symbol of the legal system trying to cleanse itself of its own moral ambiguity.
You're getting it. Dickens masterfully weaves together the personal and the societal, demonstrating how individual lives are both shaped by and reflect the larger forces at play.
So when you approach Great Expectations as a literature student, it's like you're seeing it through a special lens, right?
Yes.
You start noticing all these hidden layers, the symbolism, the recurring motifs, the way Dickens uses language to create meaning and impact.
You become an active reader, not just passively taking in the story, but engaging with it on a deeper level.
And that makes the reading experience so much more rewarding, doesn't it? You're not just reading a book, you're having a conversation with a brilliant mind across time and space.
Exactly. And that conversation can continue long after you finish the last page. Dickens provides so much food for thought, questions that still resonate today.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. The plot, the characters, the use of imagery and symbolism. But before we wrap up, I have to ask about the different interpretations of Great Expectations. It's been adapted countless times, so there must be like a million different ways to read this book, right?
Yeah.
It really does. It feels like a book that can be read on so many different levels.
You're absolutely right. Great Expectations is a coming-of-age story, a social commentary, a psychological thriller, even a romance, depending on what you focus on.
Yeah. That's the beauty of literature, isn't it? It's not about finding one definitive meaning. It's about the conversation, the different perspectives we bring to the table.
And that's why Great Expectations continues to resonate with readers, even centuries after it was written. It speaks to something fundamental about human nature, our desires, our struggles, our search for meaning and connection.
It's a timeless story. Are there any interpretations that particularly stand out to you? Any that shifted your own understanding of the novel?
Yeah. Well, one that I find particularly insightful is the idea of Great Expectations as a critique of the British Empire. Some scholars argue that Pip's obsession with becoming a gentleman mirrors the way the British Empire sought to impose its values and culture on, well, the rest of the world.
So Pip's ambition becomes like a microcosm of the empire's expansion.
Yeah.
And his eventual disillusionment reflects the moral complexities and consequences of colonialism.
Precisely. And if we think back to how Pip's wealth is ultimately tainted by its source, Magwitch the convict represents the exploited underclass, the people whose labor fueled the empire's wealth.
It's like Dickens is making us see the hidden costs of that greatness, the human toll behind the facade.
And that connection between individual lives and larger historical forces is what makes Great Expectations so, thought-provoking. It's not just about one boy's journey. It's a commentary on England itself, wrestling with its identity and legacy.
Makes me want to reread the book with this new perspective in mind. Speaking of different perspectives, before we wrap up, I have to ask about the two different endings Dickens wrote. It's not every day you get to choose your own ending.
It's a fascinating choice for Dickens to offer. In the original ending, Pip remains alone. His great expectations are shattered. It's a bleaker, more realistic ending, perhaps reflecting Dickens' own struggles at the time.
Okay. And the revised ending, the one we're more familiar with.
In the revised ending, there's a glimmer of hope for reconciliation between Pip and Estella, a suggestion that they might find happiness together. It's a more optimistic conclusion, but it's still tinged with ambiguity.
So which ending feels more fitting to you?
That's the question, isn't it? There's no right or wrong answer. It depends on your own interpretation of the novel and what you take away from Pip's journey. Do you believe in second chances? Is redemption possible even after we've made mistakes?
It's a testament to Dickens' skill as a writer that he leaves us with these questions rather than, simple answers. It's what keeps us thinking and engaged long after we finish reading.
Great literature doesn't tell us how to think or feel. It gives us a space to explore those questions and confront our own great expectations as we navigate the world.
What a perfect note to end on. For our listeners, if you haven't already, I highly recommend diving into Great Expectations. And even if you've read it before, as we've discovered, there's always more to uncover. It's a novel that stays with you long after you turn the last page. There's always more to uncover, isn't there?